So we have our RTV on the end of the tail housing. We have our bearing in place with the race. We have this cleaned out for the bearing on the case. We have some assembly goo there, lubricant for the end of the shift rod. And we've lubricated this so that the offset lever can slide on and off if I get it lined up. Slide on and off nicely. You're going to take your ball bearing with assembly lube in the detent plate. There's a center slot. It's a long thing. You're going to put that right in the middle. Okay? Right there. And the assembly lube will keep it there. You're going to take your offset lever and you're going to get some assembly lube on the spring and you're going to shove it up inside of the offset lever. You're now going to put that on top of the spring so that on top of the ball bearing. The spring sits directly on top of that ball bearing. That's neutral position. Now with the transmission jacked up in the air and luck in your favor, in a prayer, you're going to slide this over top. You're going to see the shift lever come into the shifter box. Push down on the on the offset lever, and you're going to line up that hole so that it goes in. There we go. Now, the temptation is to just go ahead and shove it on. You're going to get a pick out of your toolbox, a straight pick. That's not a straight one. This will work. And you're going to slowly work this in and try not to move that shift rod. Now, if the shift rod wants to move, you can take a pliers. This is not a pliers. Put it on pause for a second. If the shift rod wants to move in and not slide into here and line up with the pinhole, you can take a pliers sometimes and coax it. Once you see the drift pin, the roll pin slot come into position, just try and stick a pick down inside there. Almost there. Use my pliers here a little bit. Try not to scar it up. There, I can see it. So I used a pick. I can get a drift down in there. Once I have my drift down inside, I've kind of captured it. Now we're good. Now the case and the tail housing should be all together, mated up, and with this locked in position, you are now safe to put your bolts in. So once you have your tail housing bolted down, this should be lined up so your pick or your drift is lined up with the roll pin hole. Put a little lubrication on your roll pin and drive it in. You have to make sure that your roll pin, you didn't leave one in there, because if you drive a roll pin down on top of another roll pin that's already in there, you'll jam the other one down against the detent plate and you'll have a huge problem. So it drives down flush. You should have a cup here that if it's in good shape, keep it. Just put a little lubrication in there, clean it out, make sure all the dirt and dust is out, put it back in. Now you're ready to make sure that everything is torqued to specification. I just make it not gorilla tight, because these are steel bolts in an aluminum casing and an aluminum thread. So, you know, you want to get it snug, but you don't want it super tight. So I'm using a small 1/4-inch drive ratchet, 10mm socket, alternating locations around the case. That's how tight I make it. Make sure I get every one. Okay. At the rear of the case, you'll remember there was a bearing race. Inside the tail housing, there was a place where that bearing race will seat. Well, we have to make sure that that bearing race moves into that seat properly. So we're going to take a rubber mallet and we're going to tap on this input shaft, which of course will bring energy through the main shaft, and that rear bearing will push that bearing race into that location. Otherwise, we will not be able to correctly check for our shim and end play, shims and shim size. So I'm going to use a rubber mallet so I don't damage anything. I'm going to smack on this, and that will make sure that that bearing race will seat inside the tail housing. Now, we still have one step, and that is to seal the bearing retainer here. So we're going to remove this, and now's the time to check for end play. When you check end play, you're checking how much the input shaft pistons this direction, in, out, in, out. You're not worried about this side to side. Side to side is controlled by the pilot bushing, which holds onto it here and prevents side to side walking. You want to make sure there's no end play. So end play is if I could move it back and forth. I cannot move this one by hand. It's going to be pretty good. Now's another time to check to make sure that you're still in neutral. You want to be in neutral. So you want to hold on to your tail shaft and be able to turn them independently of each other, your tail shaft and your input shaft. And I am indeed in neutral. So we've just unbolted the bearing retainer. I've checked for end play. I didn't really feel any end play. If you had end play, you would add shims underneath the bearing race. This already has a shim, and it feels really good. They come in different thicknesses. You can buy them in a variety of thicknesses, and you would just have to play with it till you got zero end play. Now I'm going to clean these surfaces with acetone and put some RTV around here. Again, you've got a new seal in here. You're going to put the small Boss that's rounded at the 12 o'clock position and the square boss at the 6 o'clock position. That would be correct. You're then going to slide that in and bolt it on. Now if you're doing the Jeep shaft swap, now's the time where you would calculate how much of the bearing retainer sleeve you would want to cut off. You want it to be similar for most Chevrolet transmissions that bolt directly to the bell house. You would want it to be very similar to this length here. So cutting it off somewhere in there. What you're going to do is you're going to take your factory transmission, measure from the face of the case to the end of the bearing retainer sleeve, and then duplicate that in this transmission. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to take a rag then and you're going to cut that shorter while it's off the transmission, of course. Then the other thing is you're going to do is you're going to take a rag and you're going to wrap this and you're going to nip off the end of the Jeep transmission shaft pilot tip to match the distance from the face of your factory transmission to the end of the pilot tip, so that you're duplicating the same length. That would be for something that's bolting this directly to the bell housing. So that's where we're going with this. I hope this video has helped you solve your transmission problems and get your T5 on the road.